Okay. Alrighty. We are live with the OpenJS Foundation Standards Working Group meeting on Tuesday, January 28th, 2020, aka my grandmother's birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Grandma. So if you don't mind, please take a minute and put your names in the doc for attendance. Do we have any announcements we want to start with today?
TC39 is next week in sunny Hawaii. Feel bad for those who are attending, including myself. That's the biggest piece of announcements I've got.
That is lovely. Actually, for some reason, it was in my calendar as today, so I'm glad I didn't like tweet or message everybody like, congrats, have fun in Hawaii. Super duper. Other meetings or announcements? Okey-doke, none. Then let's dive right in. Starting with chartering the standards team, issue number 58, which we also discussed today at our CPC meeting. Miles, would you like to update the group?
Yeah, so briefly presented it to the cross-project council today. I think that a good chunk of the people on this call, but not everyone was there. I presented the idea that, you know, we wanted to be chartered to kind of oversee and have the ability to independently act on decisions regarding engagement and standards. The specific example that I gave was, hey, we reached consensus, at least between the standards group and the CPC, about trying to become members of the OSI. And if that membership goes through, how do we decide who is our representative? And it would be good for this group to be able to decide that without having to go to the CPC for permission, as would be the same for kind of all standards engagements. There was no concerns or objections to moving forward with that. So it seems like the ball is in our court to put together maybe some text, and I can kick that off with a pull request of, you know, like what a charter could look like. And then we would just have to bring that charter to the cross-project council for review and approval. Anyone have any questions or thoughts about that?
So, and just for clarification, you're thinking, you know, drawing from our charter template and the node charter as examples, we would work on that as a in a PR here. And then we would open an issue on the CPC repository, similarly to the way that we're doing project charters.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, and this is like totally like a nitty process thing, we technically don't even need to open an issue unless we want to have open discussion over on that repo. We could always just tag our PR with the CPC label, like we did the issue that's in our tracker. And that would still end up on their agenda for review. But we may want to make an issue to like ping them. What I would imagine would be, it would be a little bit extra work for us because we're going to be the first group that's doing this. But I do think, you know, getting this process together and figuring it out, even things that seem like really benign, such as do we open an issue or not, is the kind of stuff that would be good to kind of document and turn into process so that, you know, other folks have good rails to work on when they want to do similar things.
So how can I help move this?
I would say that to start, nothing, but like once we open, once
done,
I open a PR with an example charter to start with, just kind of going through and commenting, you know, we're gonna, like, the biggest thing that the charter will outline that will be important will be a combination of, you know, what are our responsibilities and what are not our responsibilities. So what are we asking for and what are we not asking for explicitly? And I think it will be extremely important that we have unanimous consent, like we have true consensus as a group around this, because we need to be, like we're asking for responsibility, and as a group, we need to all be on the same page about that before we go to the CPC to ask them to sign off on it. And so, Michael, I guess, Mike, the short answer would be to go through and give like a really honest review. Don't spare feelings. Be really, really into it. The one thing that I will let people know, and like when we open an eventual pull request, I'll make sure that there's information in there, is there's a difference between the charter and governance. And so a great way of thinking about this is like the charter is a contract between us and the CPC. So any changes that we want to make to the charter, arguably even like spelling errors, grammatical changes, editorial changes. Traditionally in the Node project, any changes like that to a charter does require upstream approval in order to land. That said, something like our governance document, which outlines our process, does not require any of that. So one of the things that's a really important thing to keep in mind, and a challenge when drafting something like a charter, is ensuring that we properly abstract and separate these ideas, so that the charter kind of makes the contract about what we're responsible for, and then the governance has the process of that. So for example, the charter may state that we are responsible for deciding or approving who goes to represent OpenJS at standards meetings, but we would put all of the process around how we do that into the governance. And it's important that, like, especially if we're owning it, like, we're not asking the CPC for permission on our process, we're asking for them to sign off on us being able to control a particular problem space. So just, I'll make sure to make note of that in the PR, but when we're eventually reviewing that, kind of keeping that in mind. And if there's things within the charter that we think we need governance around because it doesn't exist, we can either A, include in that PR updates to our governance document to encompass that, or alternatively, keep notes and make follow-up changes. And a quick point of order, Jory, we've got Jordan who needs to be promoted.
Oh, thank you. I was taking notes. Done.
All right, thanks, Miles, for explaining. If it's gonna land eventually as a PR that we then need to build consensus on, might it be worthwhile? Because PRs take a while to for somebody to kind of iteratively incorporate edits. Might it be worth starting with a very rough Google Doc and letting kind of people add stuff, and then pick someone once the comments have kind of died down to adult war, pick somebody to turn that into a PR and manage kind of the lower level of edits that happen after that?
Yeah, we definitely can. My gut, for what it's worth, is that like most of the structure of this document is going to be like pretty consistent, and it would be more or less like the list of things. But yeah, like, I mean, for getting the first pass of things done, a Google Doc will likely have a little bit more velocity. So, not a bad idea to start there. So maybe we can make a doc and then drop it in the issue.
You want me to drop a link in issue 58?
Sure.
Cool. I think that discussion actually answered the one question that I had, which was connecting kind of the process we're going to embark on with the CPC, and I think there's a connection between admin docs that the Node project had that are coming over. And so just I'm curious if that is at all related. And I guess this is more a question for Miles and maybe Jordan or our folks that are more familiar with that corpus. Is that, are these documents that are going to be coming over from admin, do they have any bearing on what we're doing or no? I feel like no, but I don't know.
I don't think so. Like there's some things around like management and process that's in there. But the document that I'm actually thinking about, which I'm digging up right now, is in the TSC repo. And there's like a thing called working groups here, which I will drop into the chat right now. And this document includes in it like a Bootstrap governance document. Now, for what it's worth, and maybe I was wrong in this, you know, it kind of seems like for the working groups, excuse me, that they just have a governance document and not necessarily a charter. I guess maybe I'm remembering things wrong when I'm looking at this, because yeah, now I'm looking just at the release working group. So maybe I'm mixing up the chartering from the board to the TSC, from the TSC to working groups. So amending what I had said before, although I think it depends on how we want to do this. Like if you look at the Node.js release working group, for example, they only have a governance document, and that governance document does have a thing that says what the working group has authority over. But most of the other stuff that's in there that's required is like, hey, what's the name of the working group? What do they have authority over? Collaborators, how collaboratorship works. Membership, how membership works. Meetings, how meetings work. The fact that they use consensus seeking. The DCO, the moderation policy, the code of conduct. So kind of even just like with that in mind, looking at what we have right now, if we're to use that, like we actually have 90% of that stuff in here. We'd want to add the DCO, and we'd want to add a paragraph about, you know, what specifically, like at the top here, they have that list of the working group has final authority over this project, including, and the list of things that it has responsibilities over. It seems like that's the only thing that's missing from our governance doc in retrospect.
So we could, as a matter of like just bringing that into alignment, update our governance doc with those things that are missing.
And then just bring that to the CPC.
And bring that to the CPC. I still think it's nice to do the charter step, even if it's, but that's just me.
Yeah, so I guess this is like a fundamental question that maybe we would even put to the CPC is, are we a working group of the CPC, or are we a separate autonomous entity? And that may be the specific difference between needing a charter or not. So if I look at Node's working groups that they have, there's streams, there's build, diagnostics, Docker. If I look at each of these, they have governance.
I would argue that it would be by far simplest if we are under the CPC, just considering if there's an issue with our own activities and someone wants to express a complaint about those, if they can't complain at the CPC, do they really need to go bother the whole board, or how does that work?
So I don't think it would ever be chartering by the board for this work. I think it was more like in the new structure, the CPC is chartering each of the individual projects. So the question would be like, would standards follow a similar process in chartering, or do we have a lighter weight process because we're a working group of the cross-project council? I think those are the two different modes, neither of which would involve the board, because even for projects, if you disagree, the first, like the CPC is chartered by the board to oversee all this. So concerns, I would imagine, would go to the CPC. I would only get to the board if you are unhappy with the result from the CPC.
Cool.
So just a quick question. Do we want to just amend our governance document, or do we want to start a separate charter? Do people have opinions here?
Simpler the better.
So does anyone object then to us just, and Michael, I know you just made the doc, thank you for that. But does anyone object to us amending our governance document with kind of this list of things that we are responsible for? And then kind of bringing that to the CPC. And maybe what we do need to do then is include something like that working groups document that exists in the Node.js core team, and make a pull request against the CPC repo with a similar document that would document standards as a working group and talk about the process of like how to make a working group and what a working group means.
That sounds really good.
That sounds really good, yeah, for me too.
All right, that seems simpler.
Okay, I'm happy to take that action item. If anyone else would like to do it or wants to pair with me on it, I'm happy to work with folks. If they'd like to do it as kind of like a learning exercise, but you know, if everyone has better things to do than drafting governance, I'm happy to just take this one on.
I can help if you like.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right. Well, that seemed very productive. I think maybe we just made life a little bit easier for us, ourselves, we all. We all, y'all, we all.
Wall?
See, I've been really into using y'all, but then I realized that y'all excludes me. So it's now we all. Okay, sorry.
It's the royal y'all.
It's the royal y'all.
What's the equivalent with yin?
I don't know.
When?
When? all I do is win, no matter what. Just kidding. That was a reference. That was a song reference.
Professional.
Yes, very original. I'm in a weird mood this afternoon. Issue number 56 is governance, getting permission to attend meetings. And this is actually a pull request, apologies. And Miles, this is one that you opened, or you opened also after our last meeting. Do you want to have a little bit about it? We've got some changes requested and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I held off until we had the meeting to kind of talk about it. So wanted to this is just kind of a scratch of what it could look like for attending external standards meetings. I'll just read you the copy that we have right now. At various times, members of this committee, and that may actually be something that we want to change, because maybe it doesn't have to be members of this committee. So we might want to say, or members of the foundation. Does anyone, that's actually like a first part that I think is important to get through. Do people have a preference? I feel like the standards group should be responsible for kind of coordinating all of this, but perhaps to attend or participate in a standards meeting, one does not need to be a member of this group if we're focused more on the governance.
If we could use the term representatives of the working group, that would be probably open enough, and then with the acceptance of such a pull request or an issue would not exclude anyone, but would still give us the authority of approving someone even just for a single meeting.
So I think on a certain level, what we do want to ensure is that the person that we're sending as a representative is at the very least a active member in one of our project communities as a requirement. but not necessarily that they're coming to these meetings every week and have a PR open with their name on it. You know, I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
But I would also say that whoever is doing the representing, they should appear in these meetings if needed, or post an issue or something to like update us on what happened in their standards like participation.
So I think that actually raises a really interesting question about the purpose, and this would be something that would be important as we charter, and one of the reasons I think chartering is good, like the purpose, goal, and mission of this group. And when we think about it, it's like, I think there's 2 directions that we could go, probably more. But there's one direction we could go where like, this is the group where the work happens. So like anything that you want to do that's standard related happens within this group, and then kind of we engage in other places. And I think the original copy was drafted with that in mind. The other way of thinking about it would be more akin to how the cross-project council works, in the sense that like the labor itself is not even necessarily our responsibility. Our responsibility is ensuring that we are unblocked to engage in the standard organizations that we want to be in. We have governance and oversee the approval of people getting involved, that if people want to go and do something, that we've done the due diligence to ensure that like they are the appropriate representative. And maybe the reality lies somewhere in the middle. But for example, members of the Node project came and asked me some questions because we had a bit of a standards initiative spinning up there prior to the merger of the foundation. And there was a question of like, hey, if Node, specifically Node, wanted to send a standards representative to work on a proposal for modules, just as kind of a random example, are we gonna like require that person from that project to come and participate in these meetings, to do a presentation to our group in order to like actually engage, which seems to me in retrospect like a lot of overhead? Or are we mostly going to ensure that, hey, this person is coming, they are actually in fact a representative of Node, and the thing that they're working on is in fact something that matters to that project? Because the latter case seems more like one in which we are working for the projects to enable them to have this. Whereas the former seems much more like we own it and people need to come work with us if they want to do it. And I'm kind of on the fence about it, and have been starting to lean more towards the latter, in which case like our mission is much more around governance and less around the labor.
The way I read this is that with this, we are setting up a process for looking at the representation of this working group at external meetings on a case-by-case basis. And if we have a system for looking at all of these on a case-by-case basis, I do not see a reason for us to exclusively limit the ability to approve people to be just members of this working group. It may be that there may be cases where we would have a requirement for a person to be a member of the working group, but it may well be, such as the modules team example that Miles just mentioned, for us not to require that. We are going to be looking at these case by case. Why do we tie our hands ahead of time?
Yeah, and exactly to that, like it seems to me like our role should be much more about creating the process and running the process that empowers our foundation to engage in these organizations in good faith, which could include preparation, could include some degree of work. But I do have some concern in retrospect about the direction that some of the language in this proposal started with, and some of the ideas that we had initially that would kind of make membership a requirement, and engaging in the work of this group a requirement to then participate in standards?
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute, because, you know, another hat that I wear is one where I want to make these, like the standards developing organization more effective and productive. And one of the things that sometimes gets in the way of that is when an organization is not internally consistent, right? And I think that one function our standards working group could play is helping our organization be a bit more internally consistent when they go to represent their project, but also the OpenJS Foundation at that particular organization. So, you know, you used an example of a modules working group. I wouldn't rule out the possibility that another project might want to go and work on that problem in a standards space. And we would probably want to make sure that our two projects that are both interested in that topic are productively cooperating, you know, before we go send them out to, I don't know, that's one case.
Yeah, so like our group would serve as kind of like an arbitrator and also surfacing to others. So like, for example, if someone from Node wanted to go to TC39 to do something on modules, the requirement that we're kind of outlining here in this process doc would be, you know, so let's go back to reading it. It's like, at various times, members of the foundation will attend standards meetings at external organizations as a representative of the OpenJS Foundation. I substituted some new copy there. I'll send a request afterwards. If a member would like to attend a meeting as a delegate of the OpenJS Foundation, they should open an issue stating the standards meeting they wish to attend, the OpenJS Foundation relationship to this standards organization, the date and time, the date and location of the meeting. Emily has a note here that if it's a recurring one, it would be good to see if a single issue could cover a whole series of them. If they'll be attending in person or remotely, the estimated cost of their participation. I guess one thing that is missing here is the intended work area that they're focused on. Can someone think of a better way to phrase that other than the work area?
Well, so I don't know.
Or the scope of work that they plan to do at that organization?
Yeah,
That would be good.
Hat of the foundation. Yeah. Like they can do whatever they want, but like, because we've already talked about the requirements, that they're very clear about the hat they're wearing, you know, and which voice what they're speaking with. And it seems reasonable to do what Miles you're suggesting and like require that they outline the scope of work that they're going to do with respect to the foundation.
As opposed to any other hats that.
As
they
opposed to
might
saying they're not
wear.
allowed to voice any opinions that aren't sanctioned by this group, saying that that per our previous, I forget which documents it says it in, but that they just have to be clear about which things are from this group or from this foundation and which things are not. Does that make sense?
That seems reasonable. I mean, that seems like an efficient way to avoid kind of nasty surprise.
So, and I think that this could be rather broad in the sense of like a great example, and I'm not saying that this would happen, but you know, something that people can consider. TC39 has had problems recently with note takers. And in the past, oh, and we've got Richard Gibson who needs to be promoted right now.
thank you.
In the past, my understanding was that the JS Foundation, through an in-kind donation of the time of Rick Waldron, helped to maintain the notes for TC39 for years. So an example of an issue that I could see someone opening would be something along the lines of, I would like to attend TC39. I would like this to be a regular attendance, so it's not even just one time. So we can maybe extend that particular note about date and time with information about being recurring, as Emily had suggested. I would like to continually attend TC39 representing Foundation. The scope of the intended work is to help with note taking. Now, I don't think that we need to put like a gag order on people, but to Jordan's point, like they probably should not be representing the Foundation when discussing other things at the meeting, unless that is something that has been discussed in the past. I guess like the one place where this gets, and I think maybe it would just need to be a gray area, is if we think about the case of, you know, a particular project like Node sending a delegate, there may be n number of different workspaces that they care about and have opinions representing Node. So I, for one, generally am going as a Googler, but I do speak on behalf of Node because in particular scenarios, I am aware of Node's positions on things, or alternatively, as a maintainer of Node, can speak to my experience there. And I think that it would be not really plausible to try to gag people because there's no way that you know everything that is going to be discussed beforehand. So I think we need to be a little bit careful about the way in which we frame that language. But I do think, to me, one of the key bits here is that people should be going with like an intended purpose, not just going because they want to be in the room. But maybe even that's fine. I just think we should kind of have some sort of consensus around, you know, what scope is acceptable.
So I feel like that is all interesting and good stuff, and then it kind of strayed a bit from our you know, our first question about our expectations for like membership / participation in the standards in this particular setting, in this space. It sounded to me like the group was agreeing that we want to be more of an empowerment vehicle for our projects, recognizing that that may require us to also play a bit of like a like arbiter in some cases of like, hey, group A, please make sure you're talking with group B, because so we do need, to a certain extent, some information to flow to us. So to that end, I feel like it should be reasonable for us to require that if your group node wants to send somebody to talk about the modules, then yeah, they should at least inform us, and then that should be part of the process. Does that capture in a nutshell what we were saying? I was trying to summarize it and then I realized I wasn't doing a very good job summarizing, so yeah.
One aspect that is raised by this sort of approach is that this whole process is implying that, you know, you do these steps and then the issue or the ask, the request will be approved. And what if there's something that we don't want to approve? Are we then saying that that person is not allowed to attend whatever meeting they were planning to attend, even if they're not intending to represent OpenJS, the foundation, but the specific project?
Well, so in standard, in like the standards work in particular, a lot of times participation in a group is gated by membership, right? So if we're saying, you know, hey, project or person, this isn't really in alignment with our values, or for whatever reason, we do not wish for you to represent the OpenJS Foundation on this issue at this working group. We can't prevent them from going to represent their point of view through another membership which they may have access to, right? Or through an invited expert membership, which the chair of said working group would have at their discretion to invite that person. But we can say, like, this person's views this person isn't representing us in this capacity. Does that answer does that make sense, I guess? Mm-hmm.
Yes, it does make sense, because it also clarifies that we are not looking for this process to be used by individual projects that may have members attending via, for example, invited expert status to external standards meetings where they're not intending to explicitly or officially represent the OpenJS Foundation. But that then is contrary to what was said earlier about looking to help people that are attending these meetings, to help them coordinate with each other. Do you see what I think there's a internal conflict here, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that conflict is exactly what I was trying to surface. And for what it's worth, not to derail, but I think these questions are the exact kind of things that we need to sort out before we charter, and should be part of our governance before chartering. But I do think that we need to be in a position to serve the projects and create like a consistently applied process for projects to participate. And I think that needs to be like fair. And in doing so, it leaves me feeling like this group, while the group itself can maybe spin up particular initiatives, and similarly, people can come directly to the group, and the group may want to represent OpenJS in places. Sorry, I'm like going in a circle here. I guess like the biggest thing that I'm trying to get to here is from like the perspective of Node in particular. How do we make this not a regression to what existed before, where Node in its own foundation could have gone and represented Node at standards bodies and did it, to saying now, okay, well, if you want to do it, now there's like a whole bunch of other meetings you need to participate in. I think that we should have a process that is lightweight enough that, aside from kind of opening an issue and answering a couple questions, there shouldn't be too much more work that a member of a project needs to do in order to do this. And we act more as facilitators than anything else.
It's not just Node, it's message format effectively as well, because, well, I'm participating myself as an invited expert in ECMA 402 meetings and in the Unicode message format working group meetings. And this is very directly through my work in message format. What I think would be good is to amend this Miles's edition to not just cover the attendance at meetings as a delegate of or a representative of the foundation, but to say to also use the same process or something very, very similar that would not require acceptance, but just to be able to, I think we can ask people who are representing even just a project at a external standards meeting to please file an issue, tell us about it, and that's all we need. And then if they want to actually represent the foundation, then that requires approval. on a little further thought, that might not work as issues, but it might need to be a pull request for a document that has a list of things.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm thinking is, like, if we do kind of refocus around the empowerment angle and, like, you know, enabling projects to do this, and coordinating it and everything, then to me, one of the values that the working group provides is a central place where, you know, for example, at the end of the year, when we want to celebrate things we accomplished, we can say, hey, you know, our projects collectively they went to X many meetings and they accomplished X many things across X, you know, like, it's kind of a nice thing to be able to reflect on and share with the community about, like, the impact that we're having in these spaces. So some simple process that, like a pull request or something like that, then becomes an artifact, right? That helps us point to impact. So I like that. Plus Rachel will love it in terms of, like, blog post content for the, okay, that's a joke. So I feel like we have a lot to chew on and work on this pull request. Like, we barely got into, like, the first sentence. So next steps for us on this would probably be to go back and kind of revise based on some of the conversation today, and in particular that bit of conflict. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear from a few of the other people on this call who haven't spoken yet. I won't directly call you up by name, but since we're talking about something that, like, in theory fundamentally changes the mission of this group, or maybe a better way of phrasing it would be, like, kind of hones in on a more direct focus. How do people feel about that? And like, where does it leave you in the thoughts of A, your participation in this group, and as kind of B, the purpose of the group?
I am currently unaffiliated with any project as far as I know. So I would probably not be able to continue with the group, except in a kind of, you know, generally assisting in a non, you know, in a way that doesn't carry an authority. I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with the things too, but one concern that we had is, like, previously we had a very big discussion about who we are going to call as members of this committee or members of OpenJS Foundation and things like that. So we had a very big discussion. I think that it was a pull request opened by Mike, I guess so. And so yeah, basically I'm fine with it, but just to have a thoughts on that. That's it.
As a side note on that, I think we should kick up a issue or something to the CPC to get a definition of to have a definition of what is a member of the foundation. We've used that term here, and I, for one, am not really sure what it actually means. We should not, I think, address that question now. Just it should be addressed in some form that is not this standards body.
And I feel like we ask some pretty existential questions in this group.
So, I mean, with this in mind, like, when we talk about foundation members, there is not an individual membership program right now. So, you know, a member is technically any active participant in any project. Now we could even make that broader and say, and then this is something that could, like, help in the case of someone like Mike or someone like others in that scenario, where we could change it to be something like, at various times, members of the standards team or foundation projects will attend standards meetings. That to eventually turn to standards working group. I just updated that because then that makes a broader thing where, you know, folks who join this group and are active in this group can still apply to participate in the standards groups. And I guess, like, if we kind of think about living a little bit in both worlds, like, we could still exist entirely to empower individuals from specific teams and projects within the OpenJS Foundation to engage. Well, we could also be strategically thinking about OpenJS's involvement. A great example of that, let's say the OSI. If we get that OSI membership, which was approved by the CPC and went to the board, we need an OSI rep. Now, we could do a call out to all the projects to see who that would be, but that is clearly a rep that is representing the foundation as a whole. And that makes sense that that person would be probably a member of this group, although someone who is a member of a project could put their name in for it. What I'm getting at here in a long-winded way, though, is that I totally can see a world where it makes sense that we empower every single group within the foundation, which includes our own group and our own membership, to do this work.
I think, I think kind of there's value in being project driven to some degree. So, you know, my interest in this organization is because of my interest in, you know, kind of the open source ecosystem, having the means to build kind of secure and robust software. You know, I would like a way to kind of advance that, because I think it's a cross-cutting concern for many projects. So if there were a way that, you know, assuming I convinced at least one project that, that I should represent their concerns, even if not being a member of that project, that would be nice. But I think we can still ground it in some kind of, you know, for a project relationship.
So I just want to do a quick time check because I just looked at my clock and realized it was already 12. It's less than 10 till the top of the hour. There's an open issue that is Emily's that I don't think we've discussed around Unicode membership. I'm curious if, Emily, are you going to be able to join us next, so 2 weeks from today, for the standards meeting, or is this something, should we address this now while you're on the call?
I think I'll be able to join in 2 weeks. It would be really great to be able to shortly address it now. So if things external to this group or meeting need to get forward, those might have an ability, or at least for me to have a direction in which to communicate about that.
Okay, I think that's reasonable to address it now. We've spent I think more time than we had actually intended on this very, very productive and fruitful conversation, but I think this is tactical. So let's switch over to that with our remaining time, with everyone's permission.
Short version of this one is that I've been effectively an invited expert on the ECMA 402 meetings for a while, and there was a working group that spun off mainly from that work to work on info.message format, which does not currently exist. And this then has developed a little bit to have effectively a wider scope, in that it's now a Unicode working group, a subgroup of the CLDR TC of the Unicode Consortium. And the membership of that group has recently ballooned quite a bit. I added in the comment a link to to a Unicode blog post about it. It's currently at 55 members, and I've been participating in that from the very beginning because message format is effectively a possible JavaScript implementation of and a representation of the spec that the whole work might end up using. So I'm highly interested in participating, and in this context, it would be really nice if I could clarify my status with respect to the Unicode Consortium and this working group in particular about whether I'm participating as a representative of an organization or just as myself. To that extent, I've linked there to I've not really looked at further in any way about this, but the consortium does include a possibility for liaison memberships, which don't carry any voting rights, but do give access to participation in the processes. And I have no idea effectively how to take this forward, whether joining the Unicode Consortium at this sort of level might be a thing that we might want, and if so, what to do about it.
So to clarify kind of what we would, you know, in that spirit of empowerment, like what we would ideally do would be to form to join as a liaison member to the Unicode Consortium, and that would allow you to continue this work with that you began elsewhere, along with what on message format. Is that accurate? Or
yeah, pretty much.
Okay. And to your knowledge, there's no fees or anything associated with that.
Liaison membership is free. It seems to be, it's by invitation only to standards and research organizations that have interest in common with the consortium, particularly in technical areas. And for that, I do believe actually we quite well qualify.
Well, it seems really reasonable. It does seem very much in line with your work. I don't know why we would not want to support that. Other thoughts or comments or feedback? So I think kind of in keeping with other, hey, do we want to join the X organization type issues, which Miles, you brought that to the CPC as well. Should we then open this at the CPC to make sure there's no objections, and then pursue it with our executive director as we have the other org, which is OSI?
I mean, like for this particular case?
Yeah.
How time sensitive is it, Emily?
No one's asked for my credentials yet,
'Cause,
but the meetings are active. The last one was yesterday.
Because the two things that I would say, depending, is like, I see no reason why we couldn't ask as a one-off. We did this, for example, with the travel fund while it was in limbo. The flip side would be, this is exactly the kind of thing that we'd be asking the CPC to give us kind of authority over. And that's, so like, I think it just depends on the time sensitivity of it. If you want to do it before, I see no reason for us to not just ask this of the CPC. I don't even think it needs to go to the board, since it's an ECMA related TC, right? Or this was the Unicode Consortium. We would need the membership.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Correct.
okay. I'm so sorry. I was thinking about it differently. So I think we should go through the exact same steps. Sorry about all the extra talking there.
Okay, cool. So then I think then that should be our next step, is to take this to the CPC and make sure then that it's also raised to Robin, who would be this only authority really outside, I suppose, the chairperson of the board, to be able to join us and to join us. So I think that's our next step there.
With the way that it went with the OSI, for what it's worth, is like we opened the issue with we tagged the CPC. I think we opened an issue. They reached consensus, that went to the board, and then, the board had a vote about whether or not to approve it, and then that went to the foundation staff to execute on. So we could follow a very similar workflow.
All right, let's do that then.
I think before I'll file an issue in the CPC about this, I'm going to reach out to the working group's chair and basically get an invitation, or make sure that we can get an invitation if we ask for it, because the liaison membership requires that technically, so that it doesn't look like we are approaching the consortium saying, hi, we would like to join, and then they say, nah, if you see what I mean.
Okay. All right, well, we are just 2 minutes over, so I should let you all go for today. Thank you all so much for a lovely and engaging, for a lovely and engaging meeting, and we'll talk to you in Slack and on GitHub later. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
You.
Stop.